In the Gospel reading today, we hear one of the several pre-Pentecost Jesus prayers, you could say, pre-Pentecost. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. We all know the Jesus prayer is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, the sinner, in its long form. But there are several times when these sort of prayers are mentioned in the Gospel. As you know, it's also called the prayer of the publican, when the sinful man came into the temple and was praying this prayer. The persecution of Christians, which ended in the 4th century, well, has it really ever ended? And initiated many to go into the deserts to pray, of course, became experts in these sorts of prayers and in gaining sanctity because they were fulfilling the commandment to pray without ceasing by these short prayers. And this particular passage shows you that it's not a vain repetition at all, but that it's a genuine call to have mercy upon one's soul with the knowledge that it is sinful and that one wants to have some sort of grace from the Lord in order that not only they might be saved eternally, but also to gain some sort of strength in their earthly life struggle. The monasteries that arose around the Holy Land at that time had to put up with a lot of, persecution that was still going on, but in more subtle forms, usually through theological discussions and persuasions and all those sorts of things. And today we do indeed commemorate one of the great theologians of the Orthodox Church, St. Gregory the theologian, of which there are only 3 that we call theologians. And if you are listening to Matins, he is one of those whom we use as the correct explainer of biblical truth, that which is written for us in the Bible and in Holy Tradition. He explains to us in rather sophisticated words. St. John Chrysostom, another one of these great theologians, although we call him Golden Mouth, explains it in more sort of down-to-earth ways. If you read his works, you'll see what I mean. The monasteries that arose had this sort of obedience for the monastics to go and to purchase food or goods if they didn't have them, if the monastery wasn't able to provide for them. And the abbot would bless one of the monks or 2, and they would go off into the city. One particular monk, George, was sent to do this. Perhaps you've heard this before. And as he walked through the desert areas and came across those of the Old Testament that did not believe in the Lord, but still hung on to the Judaic understanding of things, the ones that rejected Christ and rejected the fact that Christ, God, came in the form of perfect manhood in order to save us. As he walked, this Jew began to conversation with him and started to tell him very convincing words about his belief that Christ was not truly God. He was just a person who had particular virtues, no different to anybody else of that nature. And this conversation went on for quite a while. In the end, this George got rather sick of him and said, well, maybe you're right, maybe you're right. Went off to get the particular goods that he was obeyed to get. He returned to the monastery. And as usual in the evening, when they had the confession of thoughts before the abbot, it became George's turn to come. And he came in, sat down beside the feet of the abbot. The abbot looked at him and said, "Who are you?" And he said, "George. You're not George, Monk George." "When did you come?" "George?" He said, "It's George. It's George." I said, "No, it's not George. You look nothing like George at all." He said, "Look, call in the other monks. It's George." The abbot kept shaking his head. "It's not George. Where'd you come from?" "No, you're not. You're not even Orthodox. You're not even a Christian. Why are you saying you're George? Who are you trying to pretend to be?" Well, the point was quite clear. Having denied the truth about Christ, he lost that grace to the point where he was even unrecognizable to the holy abbot, who could see through the basic exterior features and look into his soul and see that this George was not the same George that left for the city early in the day. And of course, why I say this to you today is because so many things, particularly in the past year, have occurred where people have began to behave like this George did. And unfortunately, they are ordained people and people occupying high ranks in the church, bishops and priests and monks and others, who deny that whole truth about the incarnation, that Christ is fully man and fully God, and we're made in his image and likeness. And rather they would bow down to the powerful of the earth and deny that whole sanctity that is given to us in the church, given to us from the smallest icon, from the candles, from Holy Communion, of course, and from all the other sacraments. They have shoved that to the side, and it's a lamentable thing to say, and have instead introduced some idea that the misinformation has been promoted to us in the tyranny of viruses and that stands on a higher level than the holiness that the church gives us. 2 weeks ago, the Antiochian and Greek Orthodox jurisdictions in England voluntarily closed the doors to their churches, voluntarily, without even being asked. What are we to make of all of this? Where is it going to be heading this year and in the time to come? If that's going on now, then what sort of people are being put in to the front line of the war against unrighteousness in the world as bishops and priests and others who are given such grace in order to confess the truth in our times and don't for such small things as that. George, at least, took a different turn theologically, but these people, they do even worse. They deny the whole flock that's been given to them to be looked after, and allow that to fall into the hands of unrighteousness, the demons. It's sort of lamentable to say this, and to say it about our own hierarchs, our own brothers and sisters in the Lord, but we seek now, where are we going to find in our times truth and righteousness that is not afraid to stand up and say something? And this goes to those particularly who are in the limelight and who have taken on that position in the world as Orthodox hierarchs and whatever, to promote the truth. The American Greek one, for example, has become crazy about Luther King, the communist, and virtually talks about him as if he's some sort of saint that needs to be glorified in Orthodoxy. Let's not say anything about the one here who was persecuting his own priests. Only 2 weeks ago, we went and met with one of the priests here in Victoria who had a stroke that nearly killed him because of the pressure his hierarch was putting him under to obey not Christ, to obey the tyranny that's being forced upon people. And so it goes on. You only have to do a little search on public media, whatever, to see the sort of things that have been going on. These long edicts that they issue. You know how the Holy Fathers say, when you write and say something with lots of words, the devil's there. The devil's there. But when you say it in a few words, that's when the angels are there, the righteous angels. And they issue these long edicts trying to justify themselves before this tyranny. And when you read it, it's really only to cover themselves and got nothing to do with protecting the flock or the church establishment that has been given to them. And yet, when you take up the books of St. Gregory the theologian and read what he says, it's quite plain what we should be doing, what we should be understanding in the scheme of things. And if we can't understand that and do that, then what is the point of everything that's been given to us? What's the point? Do we just shove this away and invent some sort of new theology? Because that's the way it's heading. Some sort of new theology, not based on Christ-likeness, but based on demonology in its subtle form, the Antichrist, the one that is looking good on the outside, but inside is evil and denies the whole incarnation and the whole idea that Christ became one of us fully so that we could become God's by grace. Essentially, that's all I wanted to say to you today, because as each week goes by, these things seem to be progressing more and more. The ordinary people that I see, many of them go along with all this with a great hope that it's all going to change. Tomorrow it's going to be all back to normal again. They said the same last year, and it hasn't happened. It's only gearing itself up for something worse. Therefore, let's make some sort of effort on our own behalf that we strive to dodge all these things in our life, these unrighteousness, because we can. If God allows these things to penetrate through society, then he also gives us ways out of it. And that's what we should be examining, because we've all got intelligence, we're all well learned, we've got experience in various things. Let's use that wisely. As another group of saints that we commemorate today, the Holy Confessors and Martyrs of Russia did. They dodged that and saved that land from that communism and that yoke of unrighteousness. And yet the world does not see that. They do not see that. The Western world does not. God help us in these struggles, and may you be blessed to never ever do anything like George did, or any of these new hierarchs and others who are put in the front of the church and yet have no idea about